double music. What happened there?
Does it sound like double music?
It did for a minute there.
Okay.
Those extra drums. What's going on?
No, that's like a whole new... Does it sound like double music?
Why do we hear ourselves? What's going on?
Oh, it's over there.
Those extra drums. What's going on?
No, that's like a whole new... Does it sound like double music?
Places do we hear ourselves? What's going on?
There we are. It's over there. Boom. Okay. Sorry.
Wow.
Okay. You want to start that over again?
Yeah.
All right. Here we go.
Let's try that again.
There we go. Well, the good news
More
is...
Shelley all the time.
Good news is the stream is working. And...
Hello and welcome to World Sand Project. I am the magical sand princess and life coach to the rich and famous, Shelley Carney.
And I am your co-host today, Toby, Michael, Younis. We have an interesting sample from Leadbetter Beach in Santa Barbara, California. But even more, I have a story to tell you. And you know how much I love telling stories. So what happened is we had our live stream. We watch our live stream over here on the other monitor, and usually I turn off the speakers so we can't hear the sound. That's what we were hearing, and it was hidden behind a couple of other things, so we didn't get to see it. But like I said, we have a really interesting project today at Leadbetter Beach in Santa Barbara, California. I have spent some time there, and in just a few moments, I'm going to tell you why. And I'm going to share a little kind of special moment to me with you. I do have a friend whose name is Janet Bridgers, and I asked her if she could call in today. She hasn't responded, so I may try to call out to her. And, of course, we always have a limited amount of time. So let me switch you over to the screen, a window shot. And did you say hi?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
When we open the show.
Yeah. So this is before all of this took place, I think, before you and I met. Is that right? Because this was 2011.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So here's my story, and I'm going to stick to it. All right. Let's do a screenshot and open up the... All right, so the place that we're talking about today is Santa Barbara, California. It's, let me see, you can blow that up just a little bit. I think let me blow it up just a little bit. So it's about a quarter of the way between Los Angeles and San Francisco. It's a beautiful part of the coast, and it is one of my favorite parts of the coast. It's a well-heeled, upscale town, but it's very well cared for, and I think of it as the center core. What's another word for the beginning? The
Foundation.
Well, it's more than that. It was like where activism started in the United States.
Birthplace.
The birthplace of environmental activism in the United States. And here's why. We're on the 28th, and I should have probably done this show. Why is it not letting me move forward with this? I should have probably done this show. What? It's not giving me the arrows to...
There's an arrow right there.
Well, that gets me back to the album. So the area's on the coast, and again, Los Angeles is south of us by about 90 miles, I think. And the coast around Santa Barbara is got a bay in it, and the bay is bordered on the outside by what are referred to the Channel Islands, and they're beautiful. You can take boats out there, but the Channel Islands are a national park. So not only are they beautiful, but they're well cared for. Look at it. See, it's not letting me advance the... Oh, that's because I'm not signed in my name. Okay. There we go. Okay. I wasn't signed in as World Sand Project. So again, about a quarter of the way between Los Angeles and San Francisco on the California coast, surrounded by the coastal or the Channel Islands, and a beautiful area, mountains. The what is referred to as a coastal ridge as a result of tectonic action right there behind it, and that makes it even prettier. And the only problem was that on January 28th in 1969. Platform A of Union Oil experienced a natural gas blowout, and it was just a few miles offshore. And oil started spilling into the water, and then eventually by the next morning it had reached the beaches of Santa Barbara. And at the time, this is a recent image, but it was made by the Los Angeles Times, and they were comparing it to a spill that was made recently. This was the size and the extent of the spill that was experienced by Santa Barbara in 1969. 3 million gallons of oil, and it just headed, because of the winds, it headed right into shore from where Platform A was, right about here. It made a mess. Oil went into the shore. It covered the marina. The marina was filled with it. All the animals were in the area were covered with it, anything. And it took literally forever to clean it up, because Union Oil and the other petroleum companies of that era, although they were doing drilling offshore, they had no experience with not only the blowout, because the people on the platform, the employees on the platform, literally had no idea what to do. They had to bring in experts from government agencies to help them figure out what to do and stop the oil from gushing up. And so it was a mess. It took years to clean up, and there was a great fear that it would never be cleaned up. And if you go to Santa Barbara today and walk along the pier near the marina, you'll still see remnants of the black oil that coated these rocks back here. And like I said, I spent a lot of time there. So in the background is not the platform. That is not the platform that failed. That's another ship. And they had no idea of how to fix this problem, because it had never happened before. So at this time, what they were doing is they were taking bales of hay and they were throwing it onto the oil, hoping that it would absorb the oil, and that it would then they could then take that and put it into these kind of small boats, wooden boats that they manufactured, and then truck it off. And again, it was a completely amateur operation. Eventually, they started bringing in large trucks, but on the wider beaches, there was all kinds of heavy-duty equipment just grading and shoveling the oil off these beautiful white beaches. So the reason I know a great deal about this is that in 2011, I was teaching a class on documentary filmmaking at the public access station here in Albuquerque. And one of my students was a woman whose name was Janet Bridgers. Janet is the president, was and still is the president of a nonprofit organization called Earth Alert. And about halfway through the class, somewhere around, lecture 5 or 6, she came up to me and she said, that she just figured out she would never be able to do this in the way that I was describing. Not that it was impossible to do, but that she didn't have the time or the skills to do that. So she asked me to partner on a project we eventually called Stories of the Spill. And that video can be found on YouTube. I've put the link in the description box below. It's about 30 minutes long, and it's the story of this 1969 oil spill and the people that became active as a result of that, and you'll see Richard Nixon, who at that time, a Republican. You wouldn't think of him as an environmentalist, but he proposed and got passed through the Congress 3 of the most important environmental protection bills ever in history. Richard Nixon, believe it or not. In addition to that, these people that became active discovered that California has a process by which, if you want to make a law and you can't get it through the legislature, there's a process called the, proposition process. And if you get enough signatures, you can put the proposition on the ballot and it can be voted upon. In 1972, as a result of this spill, hang on, my throat is. as a result of this spill and the activism that came from it, California passed Proposition 20, which is the it's funny that this has this effect on me. Which was the California Coastal Protection Act, and they got it passed, and that's how California's coasts have been protected since. And that bill, the California Coastal Protection Act, eventually became a model for other states in the United States, both on the west and east coast, for implementing in their states in order to protect their own coasts. So. Last year, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of that 1969 oil spill. As I said, it occurred on at 10:45 a.m., January 28th. And in 1919, NPR wrote a great article on it, and I put the link to that article.
2019.
I'm sorry, 2019, not 19. Whoa,
it's like 1990.
That's too long ago. I put that article in there. A link to that article, as well as a link to Stories of Spill. Janet and I went on to do a second documentary called Heroes of the Coast. It's about 60 minutes long, and the link is down in the description box. And it concerns the people that were active. Some of them have aged. We had to pick up old material and film that we converted into digital format so that we could play it with interviews of them. And she actually, I'm never going to remember his name, but there was a person who was the first director of the California Coastal Commission, and he discovered he was dying from cancer. And Janet asked me if I would go out and go with her to film his last interview. And you'll see it in the Heroes of the Coast. So that's why I found this place so special to me. That's what the coastal area looks like. That's Leadbetter Beach. And as you can see, the marina right next to it, and all of this from here all the way out to about right there on the coast was covered in oil. Right now, it's clean. That's the what you see there at Leadbetter Beach mostly is just the wave action coming up. There's the high water mark right there. Occasionally it goes up to there. And they do collect a lot of seaweed. There's a ridge over to this side where I got some beautiful shots of the entire coastal region. And then I went up into the mountains and got some shots out from the mountains down into the region. So it was a real good experience for me. I'd never been to the area. I've been back several times since. So this is what our sample looks like today. Before I go to the sample, I want to take you to Leadbetter Beach. There weren't a lot of good photographs of the area, which kind of surprised me. Oh, good, thank you. I'm glad you always remember that. So this is Leadbetter Beach, and this is right here is Shoreline Drive, which is the area. And if we go to 3D mode, I think I can pop the little guy in there. Did you see that the little guy had a birthday hat on last week?
He had a birthday hat?
He had a birthday, well, my birthday, when we had the show.
On your birthday?
On my birthday, he had a birthday hat on. So let me find a place to drop him up here, maybe. And let's see if we can get a good look at Leadbetter Beach real quickly. So you can never tell what kind of day it's going to be, but that's a view of the beach. Looks like in the afternoon. There's a tidal pool, which if you take a sample from, you find all kinds of life in the microscope under it. Beautiful area. You don't see, what I couldn't see here when I did this earlier is they've removed the platforms, the oil platforms off the coast and moved them either further out into the water or completely, because when I stood on that beach back in 2011, there were still oil platforms. I have video of them out in the water. So it's a classic California beach. If you go south, south on the beach, eventually there's an even broader, when you go south of the marina, there's even a broader section of beach, and that's where all the volleyball courts are, as well as that's where the surfers and a lot of sailing inside that bay that is formed by the combination of the coast and the beach. So let's go back to the photos. This was the sample in the Petri dish. That's not actually a break. That's just where the Petri dish broken away. So I mean, it's not broken; it's soft glass mold. And I wondered if some of these black specks were some oil, whether or not there were any remnants of the oil spill in the sand. And we're going to take a look at those under the stereo microscope in just a moment. Generally speaking, I'd call it a white or off-white sample in comparison to the others that we've collected. And it did have some magnetite in it. And as you can see, this was mostly the dark magnetite rather than what we've seen in recently in previous samples where either had no magnetism at all or some of the rocks themselves, like this one right here, had some magnetic influence in the sample. Sample close up, I did find shell pieces like this one and this one. There are foraminifera like this one. And if you look very closely, some of these black pieces aren't natural stone. They actually look like quartz that has an oil covering on it, which could happen. As we got in closer, I took more than one shot with a digital microscope. Like I said, we're going to see it. And it did have a lot of shell pieces. This particular shell piece is made it through the 2mm screen, so it qualifies as sand. But it was so interesting. I took a close up of it, and I'll show you that in just a minute. The white ones are more likely pieces broken off shell, and this clear one, if you can get a real close up of it, looks more like a foram because it has the little holes in it too. So that's that shell piece, but you'll see right here where you start seeing the little holes in these things. That's likely from a foram because they put their tentacles out through those holes to eat food. I couldn't identify this one. It looked like a shell, but it looked like a little tiny clamshell to me. And of course, trying to dig these out, we're talking about the point of a pin here, and I simply am not steady enough to get in there and kind of poke it into something that'll be helpful. So. Couple of other pieces. This looked like a large chunk of calcite to me rather than some of the more clear quartz here. But you'll see a lot of these objects here because I think those are shell remnants of breaking shells. Here's what I was talking about earlier. These, to me, there's no magnetic attraction in them. They made it through the magnetic process. So I have a sense they may be sand grains, whether quartz or not, that were covered with oil and are still there working in the process. Now, fortunately for us, there are a lot fewer of them in comparison to the other natural sand grains, the quartzes that you'll see here, and the not jaspers, but the what's the word that I'm looking for? So that was that object that I showed you earlier. And when you zoom in on it, it has these odd little shapes that almost look like a turtle shell. I can't find another way to describe it. So, but it made it through the 2mm sieve, so it's definitely sand grain size and is amongst friends when it's in the sand grains. You can see how much smaller the other sand grains are. What did you have a question?
Oh, he said Virginia man said that's gum.
Gum. Where?
One of the things you're pointing at, I guess.
Oh, no. Gum. So if it was gum, like, say, for example, that, it wouldn't have made it through the 2mm sieve, right? It's these are making not only through a 2mm sieve, but then a 1mm sieve. And I wish I had them to show you. If it was a ball of gum, it would have never made it through that. It wouldn't have made it into the sample jar if it was that big. So this is one of the organics I found. It looked like a piece of, some sort of, probably seaweed, but I don't know enough about seaweed to do it. But it was something organic in there. I got a little bit closer shot of it just to make sure. And you can see it has very vegetation-like ends here that were broken off. This was cool because it was kind of a conglomerate of stuff because it had a bunch of things mixed into it. And then, again, back to kind of the main area that was quartz.
Doug Carver says, here on Prince Edward Island, sometimes when the parking lot is that close to the beach, it's remnants of asphalt.
Oh, yeah. I haven't seen that yet.
Well, I think he meant the black pieces that you thought were oil covered.
Oh, it's not that close to the parking lot. But you can see them. Look at that.
The little guy you dropped right down the edge of the parking lot.
Yeah, that's true. So another conglomerate, and there's actually a geologic name for that, and I can't remember what it is. I'll have to look it up. But kind of an average sand sample with a little bit of basalt in here, some of the darker, I'll call them oil-colored rocks, and then some, what is it? I can't remember what they're called. All right, so let's go over to the sample, take a look at it.
Feldspar?
Feldspar. Thank you, Miss Geology. So I basically zoomed in on that one organic object along with a shell. And you can see it's got a lot of color, but for the most part, it is kind of an average, very similar to what we've seen in the past. Not unusual at all. So it didn't do much to separate. As I shook it, kind of like you would if you were panning it, a lot of the bigger material ended up in the middle, kind of working together, and then a lot of the smaller material ended up. Now, again, these are all pieces that made it through the 2 millimeter and then again through the 1 millimeter sieve. So they're supposed to be in there. And they look like they're supposed to be in there. Looks like a beachy sample. So let's zoom in just a little bit and see what else we've got. Hang on. Is Tony in the room? It's always calling me.
Tony Rusi? Yeah, he's here. He's calling me the magical geology princess now.
Yeah, feldspars. So there's a pretty good look at the variations, but again, I think we're very fortunate in this case to find mostly the quartz that made it down from those granitic mountains and into it. You see the occasional piece, if you look over to the, let me see if I can get that. There's, you know what? I've been using the Petri dish on here instead of the small ones, and I'm striking it with my thumb. That's why it makes that big jump like that. So I'm going to have to go back to my small quartz. But nice variation in colors, but dominated, I would say, by quartz. I will, of course, take some additional photographs under the stereo and the polarizing microscope and add them to the collection. And there's also a link to the maps that I showed you, so you can get there. So there's all kinds of links in the description box, including links to the maps, the photos, the videos. And so I did see, I thought I saw some granite, and not some granite, some nice little collection of colors and textures in this sample, but all within the realm of what I would call normal, normal sand. So, for normal beachy sand, for lack of a better way to describe it. Nothing unusual. There's the pink quartz, or the rose quartz. By the way, we did get a box from one of our viewers that Shelley says, I don't remember having the conversation, it might have happened in chat, I just didn't see it, that Shelley says contains some crystals. So we may make some pictures of those. So there's something that looks like a calcium base, a shell, calcium carbonate base rather than
Sassy wants to know where you got this sample from because she used to hang out at Leadbetter's.
At Leadbetter's in Santa Barbara. Mm-hmm. I got it from Ron and Kelly Wade, who have provided us a whole bunch of samples and who we may get a chance to meet if we go to the International Sand Collectors Society meeting in September. Ah. And who we may get a chance to interview as well.
I see.
But I love those pieces of quartz that are almost like one of those fake ice cubes that they use in TV commercials for whiskey. I guess they can't do that anymore. But they're just so crystalline. I just love looking at them. Okay, let me move over to the polarizing microscope. I'm going to switch over here. And then I'm going to move the sample over to the polarizing microscope. Now, it's going to be dark for just a second while I get the sample over there. And then I turn the polarizing light on. Let's see what we got. Let's see if we can get some color out of this one. Wow, we got to knock down some of that yellow hue that comes. So again, the polarizing microscope, the light from the polarizing microscope is a halogen bulb. And so it tends to turn everything yellow, and I don't have an option for knocking it down other than playing with the hue, and then it just goes straight from yellow to blue, for gosh sakes. They need to redesign this software that drives these cameras, these microscope cameras. So let me go out to the edge here and see if we can see any sparkly stuff. Some of that quartz should come back at us in a little sparkly form right there.
Let's see. Doug Carver says the magnetic parts in 9 samples probably has the best chance of having gold in it. And Sassy says, I went to college in Malibu and my boyfriend was at UCSB, but the last 10 years before I moved here, I lived in Ojai, which is next town inland from Santa Barbara.
So we, while we were shooting for the movie, the B-roll, as well as the interviews, we stayed with a friend of Janet's that lived that lived in Oxnard, Bill Roundtree, and he kept feeding us. So he's got a credit in the movie for, what do they call it in film?
Craft services.
Craft services, yeah, we gave him a credit. He and his wife both recently passed away too. And they were part of all this interaction. That's how Janet knew them, Bill Roundtree. He was from the film industry, and he came out of the film industry, and every night when we'd come back to his house, he'd say, let me see the rushes, let me see the rushes. He wanted to see everything that we had shot. And he was just amazed, he worked in an era where it was all about film and cutting room floors and that kind of stuff. So he was just amazed what you could do with the digital technology. So we do get some color out of the polarizing microscope that gives us some pretty good looking rocks. That's on the edge, And these are extremely, these are very, very small grains at this point, because as I tapped them out to get, some interaction, these are the lightest ones that move out to the edge. It's almost like panning for gold. This would be the equivalent of the black sand if you were panning for gold, because it's way out on the edge. But in comparison to some of the things that we've seen recently, it really is, a beautiful sample. I'm very happy with it. And I'm happy to see that the beach, after all that work, and now it has been 50 years, so they've had a lot of time to, recover from it. But there was a point in time where Santa Barbara, the city of Santa Barbara, the residents of Santa Barbara, and it was kind of if you look at the pictures, you'll see a lot of the pictures in the film. If you look at it, it's kind of at that time it was a hippie bastion. You could tell they were all those, this was 1969, where we're finishing up in Vietnam, and people were active back here, but it literally is what did you call it earlier?
Birthplace? The
birthplace of environmental activism in the United States. That's what started it all. It can go right back to there. And then, of course, you find out, and all these stories are in Stories of the Spill. And I got to interview some really interesting people, a boat captain. I got to interview, I got to shoot. Janet did the interviews, but I got to shoot. I'm listed as director, but I did shooting, edit. I did everything. It was a team of 2, Janet and I. But I got to interview Bud Bottoms, who's an artist. He's a sculptor in bronze. And he's also, I found out, he lives up in the hills above Santa Barbara. And if you ever get into the town of Santa Barbara and you go into where the marina is, the parking area, there's this sculpture made of several dolphins jumping up in the air, one on top of the other. They're all connected. And I don't know, it's got to be 15, 20 feet tall. He sculpted that. He cast that in bronze. But he's also Timothy Bottom's father. Do you remember Timothy Bottom?
Yeah,
Yeah.
famous actor.
Yeah. So we interviewed him and several others from that era. And then after, it's a good thing that we did, because after that, they started passing away. I mean, they were...
Sassy said in the late 70s and early 80s, we'd go surfing and come out of the water with tar all over our swimsuits from the oil rigs.
Yeah. Yeah. That was literally the biggest spill of its time. Nothing that big had occurred prior to that. And it scared everybody, including President Nixon, who had, just after it occurred, this occurred on January 28th of 1969. He had been inaugurated less than 2 weeks earlier. And he was a native Californian. Well, I don't know if he was native, but he came, he was governor of California. He was a United States senator from California. So, and he was running in the next election against Ed Muskie. And so over the next couple of years, he established the EPA, for example. So there were 3 bills of great importance that are still used as basis for litigation today that were passed as a result of Richard Nixon's efforts in negotiating with the United States Senate at the time. So, so it looks pretty good under the electron microscope, I'd say. A good sample, and I will get some additional photos to incorporate them into the album above. But if you've never been to Santa Barbara and you find yourself in the California area, I strongly recommend you go into it. It's as pretty a beach town as any. I'm sure it's too expensive. It's sure as heck too expensive for me. So, but it's a wonderful place to visit, and it's one of the places where if I get back to California, I make it a point to get there. And it's not a long drive from. I guess
They say he was from San Clemente.
San Clemente, and as a matter of fact, if you recall, we did a sample. I can't remember the number, but we did a sample from San Clemente. So we had a lot of samples from California, and they always turn out to be really pretty. So I do want to show you one last time. I don't mean to bore you to death, but if you get a chance and you want to learn more about the 1969 Santa Barbara oil spill, just look for the 1969 Santa Barbara oil spill, Stories of the Spill, documentary, full length, and that's the one that Janet and I worked on. This was that, let me see if I can stop it there. So that was the sea captain I got to interview. I got to shoot. So like I said, Janet did the interviews. I got to shoot, and he was really interesting. So let me go back to my email for just a second and see if Janet responded.
Sassy says, don't do Zuma beach sand. They truck it in from somewhere else.
Zuma?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big surfing area, if I remember right, isn't it? Ask her if...
Doug wants to know what the black sand looks like under the microscope that you pulled up with the magnet.
Oh, when I pull it up, you know what, Doug? I don't ever, up until this time... I take that picture with the magnet when I'm processing the sand, and that always happens a day or two before our show. And I do that out in my garage. I have a bench out there where I do all of this work. It's a different microscope. It's a digital microscope. And then after I take the picture, I just brush it back into the sample. Yeah. So I've never actually saved it. I'm trying to see if I wrote her and asked her.
Try that sometime.
So just bring it in and look at it under the microscope?
Yeah.
Okay. You know what? I'll do that.
Put it in your little jar.
Yeah, one of the small quarts. Yeah, that's a good idea. So I will do that next time. What I'm trying to do is, I had asked Janet if I could call her. Let me see if she responded. She works. Yeah, it doesn't look like I got a response from her. She and I went to the movies. We're still very good friends, and she's my movie buddy. And when Shelley and I, Kevin and I go to the movies all the time. But Janet is a kind of a movie buff, and she'll call me and ask, "Do you want to see?" Yesterday we went to see 1917, and if you haven't seen it, I'd strongly recommend going to see it. So, all right, one last time at Leadbetter Beach, window shot, Leadbetter Beach along Shoreline Boulevard in Santa Barbara. Beautiful beach, and then a beautiful sample. So all the photos, the links to the photos, links to the maps, links to the stories of the spill, and links to the NPR article that was written on the 50th anniversary last year is down in the description box below. Okay? All right. Anything else there?
No.
Got any questions or anything?
Oh, I was born in Yorba Linda. 1913. That was a long time ago.
Yeah. It was an old guy.
If you're local, you call it the Boo.
The Boo.
Okay. That's all I got.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this sample, and we'll look forward to seeing you next Wednesday at 3 p.m. with another sample. Stick with us actually, just do our outro, and you can talk about it.
We'll be doing our giveaway on Wednesdays, so tune in on Wednesdays.
Oh, yeah.
And make sure you comment in the comments after the video's done, and here's the prize for next week.
So here's the next Wednesday's prize. To qualify for it, it's the sample that came from the sand arroyo that Shelley Carney collected. I should have you autograph this. I'm going to open it up and have you autograph it. So that's next Wednesday's prize. In order to qualify to win, you go to last Wednesday's video and make a comment. In addition to that, we have a second giveaway for next Wednesday, and that's the Rio Rancho Arroyo sand pendant. So some of the sand that Shelley collected is now in the form of a pendant. Magical treasure sand.
It's got
pendant.
Gold in it.
It's got gold. It did have gold in it. And so we'll have two drawings, one for the picture and one for the pendant next Wednesday. In order to qualify, go to last Wednesday's video. And
thanks for being here, everybody, for all your wonderful comments and fun times in the chat room. We're headed over to the softer side for an interview, and I hope that you'll join us there at 4 o'clock. And tonight, of course, on the Gypsy's Kiss, we'll be back at 7. And for the World's Sand Project, I'm Shelley Carney.
And I'm Toby Younis. Thanks for joining us. I will be going out in the field tomorrow. I promised you that I would collect a sand sample from the east side of the Rio Grande Rift. I'm going to do that tomorrow. I'm going to see if I can get some drone shots of the sand collection process. So we may have that next week. I'm not going to make a promise because I've learned that lesson. But we will have 2 sand samples next week, Wednesday and Friday. Thanks for joining us today.